Yvette, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad that you're able to join us. We like to kick it off with our first simple question of how would others describe you as a person?
Well, if you go way back and you can connect kind of the past with the current, I am probably the most even combination of my parents that you can find. So my dad is a endocrinologist and researcher, so I'm kind of tenacious about getting things done and getting to the answer in pursuit of the answer is a big part of me. And then my mom is kind of a want everybody to get along and connect people and have an impact in the community. So if you mix that all together, that's me.
And then when you say getting straight to the answer, was that something that just by seeing your father, you just picked up like this, or was it like some learned behavior because growing up you weren't always like that?
I think it's a combination. Somehow I got that gene where, I love to figure out what the right answer is, what that vision is, and see how current trends and data lead to an insight. And it's the essence of strategy, right? We apply it very differently. But that whole notion, that Wayne Gretzky notion of get to where the puck is going, I like to figure out where the puck is going and I like to get there first. So a bit of that ambition as well from my dad.
For those of you younger listeners, Wayne Gretzky, big time hockey player, way back in the day, but excellent player.
Yeah.
So let's get straight to the questions that you like to get straight to the answers. So right now you're SVP of Silicon Valley Bank.
Mhm.
All right, and you are involved around like your wealth advisor, correct?
Mhm.
So so,
Exactly.
so what does that mean? What does a wealth advisor do?
Well, that's a great question. So yes, I'm the president of Silicon Valley Bank's private bank, which is very different in my career. I've been at 8 banks, and usually I'm always at the center of wealth management and digital, always creating new models. Started out my career in self-directed trading, which has evolved into the Robin Hoods of the world. And normally for emerging affluent, people who are just building their wealth. But what a private bank is, which is a lot of fun, just to be in a different part of the whole spectrum, is for people who have amassed some wealth. And at SVB, that is from innovation. So founders, investors, influencers in the innovation economy. So we serve all of their financial needs. So that's banking, lending, including mortgages and tailored loans, as well as wealth management. Normally, the focus of wealth management is in preserving and diversifying those assets that you've accumulated. But because of the certain complexion of our client base, who are still relatively young, still in the game and innovating, they want to be as innovative with their portfolio as they are with their personal investments. So it's a bit more lean towards access to innovation, reinvesting that money in other great ideas to ultimately change the world, which I really love. Right? It's about having impact.
And then was getting into financial management or finances, banks, has that always been an interest of yours, since you were young?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you, it shows you how important public-private partnerships are. So I'll tell you a quick story where my dad is from a small town outside of Waco, Texas, called Valley Mills, Texas. And my grandparents had a farm. My grandmother was the original entrepreneur because they had a farm, and my granddad ran a mechanic shop that I used to ride my bike to. But my dad, who was a scientist, as I mentioned, would try to get me to like dissect things and get interested in science. And so he claims now he figured out pretty early on that wasn't going to happen. So fast forward to 11th grade, and he came home one day and said, "Hey, I found this program this summer." And it was in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I hope they still have it. I haven't heard of it in a long time. And what they did was the government had a program where they found small businesses and they placed us interns in the small business. So what was so great about it is they needed us. They were getting us for free. So for example, I was in a temp agency that had 2 people. So I ran the office, and the two owners went out and tried to find businesses and find temps. And I did all the matching, answered all the phones, did all the scheduling. And so all of us were in companies like that. But in addition to that, they got us together as a cohort in the afternoon and taught us marketing, finance, all the fundamentals of business. And I've been in business ever since. I went to UVA, I graduated from McIntyre School of Commerce, I worked on Wall Street, and then I went to Stanford Business School. So that program that was introducing minority students to business all those years ago led me on a lifelong journey of being interested in business and entrepreneurship.
And then align with that lifelong journey, like would you consider yourself a very financially responsible person even when you were at UVA, doing college things and just being young?
Was I responsible at UVA? No. But I was a kid. I mean, I was always interested in business. That doesn't mean I always knew money. My first passion actually was technology. And we can talk about how I ended up on Wall Street instead of in the technology department. And I was blessed. My dad worked for NIH. He had a very similar role to Dr. Fauci. So Dr. Fauci was the chair of infectious diseases. My dad chaired reproductive sciences. And I had a huge blessing that we should all aspire to give our kids, is that I went to college and graduated with no debt. And that is a foundation. I want us to aspire to much more in wealth building, but if we can get there as a community, that is a game changer. At least you start out kind of whole and move from there versus being in the hole. And that's a huge, huge gift to give to our kids, all of us, to give to our kids if we can.
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. I think there's a term that you use, right? So the reason why I was asking that question is around, as we're all young, what we're supposed to do, right? We don't all get there. We're supposed to learn more and more about financial education. And you have a term that you use called the money taboo, right?
Yes.
What does that mean? Like, what does that term money taboo mean?
Yeah, I've been doing this for a very long time. I'll have to admit, it's been a solid 30 years, right? And you always hear this term of, you know, uh, there are families that talk about money at the table, at the kitchen table. But most of us who come from disadvantaged communities, that's just not a topic. Like I said, my dad grew up on a farm, right? I mean, that's not what we talked about at the dinner table. And as I've kind of been in the industry a long time, that fact that we don't talk about money for a whole host of reasons. We feel shameful about growing up poor, as an example, or we think it's not polite, or we don't want people to know that we have questions or struggling because we have reached some status, et cetera. That is part of what is holding us back. Because we don't talk about it, because we don't ask questions, there's a small group of people that continue to have those kitchen table conversations, and that puts them even further ahead of us. So my lifelong passion is to break that taboo and create virtual kitchen tables where we can connect people and they can have the same information and the same knowledge. And you don't have to learn by making every single mistake. You can actually avoid a few, which is what I, want to devote my life to.
So let's take that, right? So for whether it's a couple, whether it's the family, those that like we have to find a way to break through and have that first, financial conversation, right? So if you're coming from from zero, you can't go straight to 100, but like what would you advise where we're starting to get that conversation going? Because a lot of us know the importance of it. And I think what you just mentioned is very true, right? Depending on what our financial situations are, we'll shy away from it, thinking that it just is not an issue, but things that you don't address continue to grow. So what's your advice, right? When it comes to us starting that conversation financially, like how can we do that?
It's a great question. And I also love to kind of see entrepreneurs pursuing this. So I don't know if you saw the news yesterday, but in TechCrunch, a app called Goal Setter just got funded and closed their Series Seed round. And I think it's a great way to bring some of this to life. But what Goal Setter is about is those initial kid-like conversations around what do you want, like a bike? What do you have as a long-term goal, like going to college or attending a summer camp next year? And then what do you want to give back? So before you even put any of that into action, just having those conversations around the difference between wants and needs, the difference between short term and long term, the difference between spending and saving, all very fundamental conversations that all of us can have. I mean, all you need is life experience to conduct a conversation with your kids like that. Now, obviously, it gets more complicated over time, and there are some fundamentals that you have to learn. But even having that concept of long-term savings versus short-term spending, and also community and what you can give back and have an impact when people are in need or people need support is powerful. And I just don't think those are always the things that we talk about.
Okay. So even like around like, let's say you just mentioned long-term, you know, long-term spending over short-term savings. Is it something where you feel like the schools also should be doing more around like the financial literacy for the students? And is there like a certain age that we should start? But like, you know, what's your take on that?
Well, it's interesting. Absolutely, we need to do more. And I'll tell you an interesting story about how it impacts us. So, many of you participate, and I participated when I was younger in junior achievement. So, I was teaching, I think it was seventh grade junior achievement. And instead of spreading it out over a couple of months, it literally was all condensed into a day. And so it was a day, the game, the final game, after having spent all the day, mainly around investing. What we did was we broke into three groups, and they happened to break along kind of demographic lines. So there was a group of boys and girls who were white, a group of Black kids, and I think a third group. One was white boys, one was white girls, and then it was a mixed African American group. So those were the three groups. And you pull out cards and you describe, this is an athletic apparel company, and they would, and who wants, and you give them money. And so they'd start bidding on it. And then whoever won it, then you'd say, this is Nike. So I start the game, and mind you, this is fake money. I start the game, and immediately the group of white kids just start bidding and bidding and bidding and bidding. And they didn't even know what some of the companies were. It was great, but they just jumped right in, right? And then that was the boys first. And then the white girls were like, hey, they seem to be getting some cool companies. Then they jumped in next. The group of Black kids, including my own child, just watched it all happen. Now, mind you, all these kids are of the same, they live in the same neighborhood, they're of the same level of affluence. And I'm going crazy, literally, like my face is losing its blood. I'm like, it's fake money. Why are we so risk averse? And then finally at the end, the Black team jumps in, and there's like two companies left. And it was bid up really high. They were not interesting companies, and they just kind of missed the whole game. So that shows you it's not about how you grow up or what your parents do. I've been in this business my whole life, and my kid was, in the group that was risk averse. So there's something about our community that we need to really change around getting in the game, around learning and making educated decisions. I don't mean gamble or throw your money away, but the biggest step is breaking the taboo, getting in the game, and you'll get better and better and better.
That's a powerful story. That's a very powerful story, because I think it speaks so much volume, where you just mentioned, right? It's not about level of fluency. It's about comfortability. It's about the conversations. It's about generational conversations, right? Wow. Now that's one I'm gonna take, and I'm also gonna, I'll borrow, should I say, and tell others, because I think that's a powerful way of representing.
Well, yeah, and I'd like to add just one more level, because obviously I get in the car, and my older daughter got in and my son was in, and I'm like screaming, like, what? This is what happened today. What is this about? And it's very interesting. And my daughter said, Mom, what you don't understand, they were at a private school, is that if a white kid gets in trouble, they might get a warning. A Black kid does the same thing and they get kicked out. So it's there's a whole
How old were they?
system. That my son was in middle school, my daughter was in high school.
Okay. Yeah.
And that leads to the risk aversion. So, that was such a powerful lesson to me, is that we're not going to change our ultimate participation in the innovation economy, which I think is the major way to close the wealth gap, until we really get at this heart of both we and families breaking the money taboo, but also our schools and our society um, teaching us to kind of stay in our lane. And that's perpetuating the problem. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. No, that's great. Great tie-in too. So, what does financial freedom mean to you?
ultimately, what I think, there's a whole array, and I know we'll touch on all of this. I mean, first it's like Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like first you have to have your basic needs taken care of. And it's back to this kids financial literacy. It's, you've got to have the basics taken care of. Then you got to have a diversified core portfolio, which is, and I know you've heard me talk about this before. It's about making sure you're mainly in a passive, diversified portfolio and you're not overpaying, hot fund managers to underperform. So that's the second plate. You've got school and retirement taken care of. And then you're participating in the innovation economy, because that's where you're going to get outsized returns. Don't put your whole portfolio there, but you've got to participate. And if you manage all of that and you're able to build some real wealth, ultimate financial freedom to me is two things. One, leaving a legacy for your kids where they're not, now we've talked about two levels. There's in the hole because you're in college debt. There's you're on even playing ground because you have no debt. Well, wouldn't it be great if you're ahead and you actually have a nest egg where you can invest in businesses or invest in the future, right? That's one piece of financial freedom, is leaving a legacy. And then the second piece is using that legacy to make a difference in the world, where you can fund institutions, you can fund research. I love the Dolly Parton story that she partially funded Moderna research, right, for the vaccine. You can start changing the world. And both of those to me are the two definitions of financial freedom.
Love it, love it, love it. So let's take it out to your different levels, right? You said you're in the hole, so there's that. Then finally, you're just like, okay, I'm done with the debt. Let me start to the legacy, to the impact. So when you're in the hole, and student loans, credit card debts, whatever it may be, getting to that level stage where you're making an impact with your own financial wealth. Do you suggest that people still find a way to invest a little bit, right? You have the Robin Hoods of the world, or is it just like, hey, attack that debt so that you can get in that level playing field first?
Absolutely. So there's two answers to debt. I mean, credit card debt and school debt, you need to get those kind of taken care of. The one exception is when you get a full-time job, you have access to a 401k, you should do your best to max that out while you're paying off your debt. That's my one exception to investing, just because it's a great benefit. There's usually a company match. Like, why miss that opportunity? And the earlier you start, you get the benefit of compound interest over a lifetime. So that's my one exception. So once you've got those three things, you're taking care of your debt and you are, investing in your 401k. Now it's time to say, and you're max it out. Like, after you get out of debt, then max out your 401k. And now you still have disposable income. Now it's the time to think about investing. And a lot of times that next investment really is for a house. So you put that in pretty conservative investments, right? Because it needs to be in something that's fairly liquid. Then it's the nest egg time. So there's a lot of steps along the way.
Okay, and then like getting out of debt. Have you heard like the debt snowball method at all?
No, tell me about
So
it.
so that's more of a Dave Ramsey concept. At least that's where I heard it from. But if someone's in debt, just to kind of build momentum to attack the lowest amount first, because as you start eliminating that debt, you start to get the confidence, you start to move forward. So it's not a matter of like attacking the highest interest. What he advises is like a debt snowball method where take the smallest amount, maybe it's $100, maybe the next one 1,000 and 2,000, and just keep it going. I was going to see if there's any advice, you know, you may have on like getting out of debt besides just doing it, right? Just get it done. But like how does one like, you know, there's a lot of people, most of America actually are in heavy debt, right? So like how does one really, you know, get to that level where now they're just, you know, their heads over out of the hole and they're like, okay, now it's time to go to stage two.
You know, you're touching on something that's so important, and that is a lot of money success, and I tapped on it a little bit, is actually emotional, right? So there's plenty of advice out there that says tactically what you should do. And it's like losing weight. We all know we're supposed to exercise more and eat better food. But do you do it? No, you don't do it, because you've got to have the right emotion around it and the right motivation. And you need to know why you're not doing it. The same, that's the main thing I want to get out about money. The same thing is true with money. So, and that's called behavioral finance in the kind of fancy terms. So the typical recommendation, like you said, is pay off the highest interest first, because you don't want to pay that interest rate. But the reason why it is powerful to pay off the smallest amount first is you get that success under your belt. And that gets you momentum to tackle the next thing. So that shows you how, in my view, and this isn't the common message, I think the emotion and the inspiration about money is actually more important than doing everything in the exact right order. Because again, it's better that you do something than you know what to do and do nothing. So I am a big believer in that.
It's crazy. I mean the exercise, eating well, right? Those are easy things to do, right? But it's easier not to do, right? I remember having a podcast interview with somebody. He's like, it's easy to do, but it's easier not to. Because
Yes.
essentially, if you have debt and you say, if I do this, I will be out of debt by this time. I remember with my wife, right before we got married, but I had student loan debt, and I was just in a conversation with her because she didn't have any loan debt, and she was just like, so what's your plan on paying it off? I was like, I pay it every month. Like, I'm good. And she's like, did you ever think about how long it would take you to pay it off and what you need to do? And I literally took out a book, calculated it, and I had it gone like within like 3 to 4 months. But it was very liberating because it was a sense of like, now you're free. But then I actually had to sit back and say, like, whoa, the amount of interest I'm paying, and then taking emotions out of it and just attacking it. And it was game changing.
Yes. That's
So
awesome.
do you suggest borrowing for a business?
Yes, I do. And I believe in making smart, calculated investments. And so, this whole notion of, I love the Warren Buffett notion of invest in what you know. That's why I'm not a big fan of uh, just catching a trend. There's a really hot one today that we don't need to talk about, but that isn't going to lead to long-term success, because you're just following other people. Um, and so if you know something or commit yourself to learning something really well, then with that confidence and with that knowledge, you should feel confident in betting on yourself. So in that scenario, I do think using some leverage in general is a good thing. And that was something I was hinting at earlier. In general, it's good to get out of debt. But if you use debt to invest in things you know, then I think that is a good calculated risk most of the time. That doesn't mean you're not going to lose money. But it does mean, what does it say? You've got to play to win, right? And I would add, you got to play smartly to win. And I would love to see more people taking that path.
Yeah, and you're investing in yourself. So I guess around that as well, what about those that borrow against their 401k?
Yeah, I mean, again, the general notion is you shouldn't do that. Now, sometimes you have to. If it's certainly better than going bankrupt, for example. But in the notion of this investing in yourself, there's two things. One, there's a way to do it that is less harmful, but more difficult to do. And that is, there is a 60-day window where you can borrow from your IRA. And then as long as you put it back in, it's kind of no harm, no foul. So that's a definite yes. Like, you have a very short-term need to get an investment going or a business idea going, and it's just a cash flow issue. Like, you don't have the money now, but you'll have the money within 60 days. To me, that's an easy one, right? And I think you can only do it like once a year. And I wouldn't do it every year, but in an extreme circumstance where you know the cash is coming in, then I think that's a great idea. Now, actually borrowing against your 401k, a lot of people are against that because you're losing the compound growth of that money. But if it's in your own business and you have a solid game plan, and I would say if you've got proof of concept, meaning you've got customers coming in, you've got some indication that you're on the right track and you just need to kind of invest in yourself and bridge your business, then I think there's lots of entrepreneurs that do that. And I do think that makes sense.
All right, all right. And then taking your analogy, right? So then now we're out the hole. Now we're looking around. We're thinking about, how can I invest? I'm ready to get started. When you think about budgeting, to people have their eyes on purchasing a home, as well as just understanding, when do I rent, when do I buy? What's that next level kind of process that we should be looking at once we're out the hole?
Yeah, there's two schools of it. I mean, if there's the really, I'm committed to a startup environment and all my cash needs to go to that startup. A lot of people defer buying a home, which makes sense until the startup gets a little bit more funded and established. But for most of us who aren't ready to just 100% commit our lives to a startup, I do think the next step after the 401k is maxed out is buying a home, because it obviously is nowhere near the appreciation of the stock market or investing in your own business, but it is such a core to wealth building. So most of the wealth gap between African Americans and whites here in this country can be explained by home ownership. Not all of it, but a good deal of it. And we all know the history of redlining. And I always give the example, there could have been a family 50 years ago, they worked in the same factory. One could buy in the suburbs of St. Louis and the other one had to buy in downtown St. Louis. And you can look it up yourself. Look at the appreciation of downtown St. Louis versus some of the suburbs to the west. And it's just a ton of difference. And so that is just a good core asset to have in your overall portfolio. So we've maxed out the 401k, now we've bought the house, and now we still have some disposable income. Then it's time to do additional investing outside your 401k.
Okay. And then with the disposable income, right? So we're talking investing, and and it matters whether you're 20, 30 or 40 and you're starting in that process. There's so the rule of 110, right? When it comes to retirement. So the rule of 110 being that you take 110 minus your age, and that's how much you should put into the stocks. Obviously, as you get older, you're putting less amount of money. That first of all, is that like just a formula that you go by? And then the second part of the question is like when people are ready to invest, how do they start?
Yeah, that's a great rule. I use something a lot simpler. And I talk about this a lot. I think it's by a decade, to your point, because the most in your core portfolio, we're talking about the core diversified portfolio, the most important is number two, time horizon. Well, it's all time horizon, right? Like this should be the portfolio that's not for something like a house or a car, because you need time to compound the interest. So since it's all about time horizon and you quote unquote don't need the money, you're not close to retirement, I go down 10% per decade. So in your 20s, I would do 100% stocks, 30s, 90, 40s, 80, and just keep dropping it. I think that's the simplest thing. If you're doing it on your own, that makes it really simple to invest your 401k, and you are kind of slowly de-risking your portfolio and getting closer to retirement.
Very, very easy rule. I like that one. So you have a quote where you said everyone should have self-directed. So everyone should have a self-directed account with I think you said 5 to 10% of portfolio to learn. And you said like the cost of learning is, has gone down tremendously. So what is this learning with this self-directed account? How do we do it?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of ways to learn. You can also learn a discipline. Like I know a lot of people who are scientists, for example, and really learn the science. So you could just focus on life science investing. So there's multiple ways. But for most of us who, have jobs as teachers and lawyers and those kinds of things, a really great way to learn about the market is, take 5, no more than 10, 5 max, 5 is my preference, and put it in a self-directed trading account. As you mentioned, some of them are actually free. And start buying fractional shares, start reading research reports that are available on the platform. And that is a great way to learn how value is both created and perceived. So there's 2 pieces of it. There's actual value creation, learning to read more of the financials of companies. And then there's also market perception. And some people choose that path. They learn a specific trade and they become really good at that. I don't recommend that path, but some people, that's just how their mind works. And that's where they can find value. Most of us start to learn different industries, and over time you start to focus, and then you place little bets and spread them all around, which has gotten much easier with fractional share trading. And then you'll see some of your investments are starting to outpace others, and then you start shifting over to the things where you're winning, because you're learning how to evaluate those opportunities. I just think if you've got the time, that's a pretty high commitment process. But I think it's really great for your long-term investing, and ultimately will help you when you get ready, when your portfolio's large enough. And now you've also checked out retirement. You have enough to retire. This is the time where you can actually potentially get into private investing, which is how you're going to create that second part of legacy. And you can take all that accumulated knowledge and really apply it to those types of companies.
Hope you all are listening. Yvette is breaking it down to simple terms. Everyone should be able to do this, right? It's one of those things, right? We said like, when you just got to do it. Is that
Yes.
Take the emotion out of it. So I want to go over some key terms, right? So people can get a good understanding. And if you can just, explain it to the very basic level. So the first one is around sectors, right? We use this term sectors to invest in, right? What are some of the sectors when we talk about tech and so far?
Okay. There's a lot of ways to talk about sectors. One way is industry sectors. So there's tech, there's healthcare, there's utilities, there's commodities. There's lots of different sectors to learn and invest in. And again, there are people that the one caveat I'll make is, if you're going to be a sector investor, meaning an industry investor, I hope you're in that industry too, because what you're competing with in the market are analysts that all they do is study that sector. So how are you going to outperform the people in the sector or the people analyzing the sector full time? That's going to be tough. So if you're going to be an industry investor, I would recommend very strongly that you're in that industry. You're a doctor, you're an engineer, you understand, you work in HR in that kind of company. You still learn the business. All of that's fine. Other kind of sectors talk about geography. And then the third kind of sectors talk about market position. So geography is, domestic, international, China versus Europe versus Latin America. You can have diversity across region. And then finally, the third sector is size primarily, and style. So there is growth, there's small cap, there's value, and growth and value are just around, is it still kind of growing and you're looking purely for market appreciation, or is it more stable and you're including dividends in the return that you're getting? And you need both of those for different reasons. Now, if all of this is all starting to sound too complicated, my main advice to people is don't worry about it. For your core portfolio, I suggest that you really focus on kind of index funds and ETFs. And what those things do is they're not trying to beat the market. And the reason why that's so important, that in any given year, 70 to 90% of the actively managed mutual funds, just to show you how hard this is, don't beat their index. So when you invest in those, it's great if you pick the right one. It's just really hard. And most of us end up overpaying to underperform, right? So you're paying the extra fee for the active management, and then 7 to 9 times out of 10, you're not going to even beat the benchmark that fund is targeted to. So for most of your money, I would focus on passive investments, which their goal is not to beat the market. Their goal is to meet their market index. So if it's a small cap investment, it is or ETF, it's meant to meet the small cap performance of that year. And therefore, the most important thing is, if you're investing passively, is just asset allocation. And then you can go back to my rule, right? Start off all in stocks, primarily growth stocks, primarily domestic with a little bit international, and then just kind of keep rolling out your circle into other sectors, every few years. And that makes investing easy. You're not trying to beat the market. You're not trying to understand any particular sector. You have an efficient portfolio because ETFs and index funds cost less. And you can allow that portfolio to grow and spend your time picking something well or you're passionate about. Start by, like I said, your trading account, and you're learning it. And then you become an expert over time. You're reading the reports, you're watching these stocks, you're seeing how they get momentum. And then ultimately take some of your money, no more than 10%, and start making investments in individual companies. And I hope some of that will be, with diverse founders, et cetera.
Great. So you mentioned ETF, exchange traded funds. One of my very good friends, he was telling me back in college to invest. I would say I didn't listen to him right away, but he was right. But one of the things he told me, and you just kind of doubled down and solidified it as well, is around, he's like, Sean, you have people working full-time jobs that are trying to beat the market and like trying to pick stocks. He said, just work on the S&P 500, which is the top 500 companies, pick the amount of money you want to invest in, and you'll be fine. And I'm like, but how does that work? Like, how can you just be fine? And how's it just going to work? He's like, Sean, the number one reason that it doesn't work for a lot of people is because of their emotions, what you just said, right? You mentioned about your emotions, because trying to buy high, sell low, but he's like, just be consistent and you'll be good. So, you validated it. Everyone that's listening, it works. She's giving us the the blue book on exactly what to do, or the blueprint. So you mentioned small cap. So just kind of go over, like, there's small cap, there's mid cap, there's large cap. What's all this cap talk?
Cap is market capitalization. And the way you calculate that is you take the share price by the outstanding shares, you multiply it, or you can just Google it and ask, what's the market cap of whatever company? And as that stock price rises, then the market cap rises. And so all it means is the size of the company. So the dynamics of a small cap is very different than a mid cap. Large cap are huge companies like, Apple and Google and all the ones we all know. And so money managers in a diversified portfolio make sure you have the right mix of those. To, let's say the benchmark you're trying to hit is the S&P 500. They will make sure inside the index fund or inside the ETF, it has the right combination of companies out of all of those parts of the market so that you get market returns.
All right, all right. I think one thing that we should talk about too is there's the ability where some people are like they're way out the hole, they're great savers, and then they hold on to like a whole lot of cash, right? And I think from the story you mentioned about playing that game, right? It's
Yeah.
the risk averse where it's just like, I'm just gonna throw my money in the market. But I think when we're talking about wealth, building wealth, and we're talking about inflation and we're talking about compound interest, you know, I need you to convince that person that holding on to all that cash, if you're not planning to, have it liquid to do something with, is not the way to go. Or, how do we get that hold on to it mentality and understand, the fact that compounding interest and everything else is what you need to build the wealth.
Yes, that is really, really hard. And again, we've got to break the cycle. Part of that comes from like what we've been talking about this whole time, how we were raised and what we talked about at home and our upbringing and our influences in society. But if we at this moment can't get convinced that our next challenge is to close this racial wealth gap, for so many reasons to make life better for the whole country and for the whole world. I think it's probably not the only lever, obviously, but I do think it's one of the top ones we have. And that starts with us individually breaking the cycle, and saying, if I continue to do what I've learned and what I've seen, I'm going to continue to get the same outcome. Now, I understand why we're in the position that we're in. And again, that's why I think you need to take smart risks. I don't want you to throw your money away or only invest in things that you've actually had experience with. So, for example, real estate is a great investment. It should be part of your portfolio, but it shouldn't be the only thing that you do, because that is the reason diversification is so important. Diversification means take all those sectors we've mentioned, types of companies, types of industries, size, perspective, geography, and spread your money around so that you get performance. So that cash and the thing about the difference between cash and the markets is the markets have outsized growth historically over the long time. It goes up and down, but over the long term, it is, outsized growth versus cash. Cash isn't growing much at all right now, right? Interest rates are so low. And even with inflation, it might go up a little bit, but it's never going to be, you're increasing the wealth gap by keeping a disproportionate amount of cash.
Okay.
And you don't want to do that.
That's all you have to say. You don't want to do that. I guess when we talk about like, so we have a lot of entrepreneurs that do listen to the show, and it's around being able to financial plan, being an entrepreneur as well, right? Because it's a different, the benefits are there, and you're waiting for it to turn profit. So I know you have the concept of small business stock exemption.
Yes.
Um, can you,
USPS.
yeah, can you align us on that?
Yes. So, I have to make my caveat, and that is you should always clear this with a tax advisor and make sure you're doing it exactly right. But the essence of the idea is that if you create, I don't think it works with LLCs. So it has to be an incorporated company that you create. And if you have shareholders in that company, with you obviously as the entrepreneur being a pretty significant one, and you hold those shares for at least 5 years, then you can potentially set it up, if done correctly, that your first 10 million of profit that comes out of those shares could be tax exempt on the federal basis and sometimes on the state basis. Now, again, the most important thing to know is that it exists, so that when you're setting up your company and you're creating the shares, that you talk to your tax accountant and make sure you set it up right. But imagine a person, like you're blessed enough to two people start these companies. One knows about QSBS, the other one doesn't. 5 years from now, pops up 6 years. You both have $10 million. One person's going to end up with 6 max, and the other one's going to have 10. So again, you've increase the wealth gap just from a lack of knowledge. And that is the essence of the whole story. That the main barrier, and there's two, is access to information and access to capital.
Yeah, you got to apply that knowledge as well. So the caveat, as she mentioned to everyone, check with your tax attorney, right? Don't come back and say, My Dream Big Club or Yvette said this. But now that check it out. I guess in line with that, right? So like now we're in the, we're out the whole business is booming, and it's important also to kind of understand, how do you minimize estate and gift taxes, right? So like, your business is booming, things are great. You've got a good nest egg, right? So you're at that stage where now, like, you can really give back and make the impact. But we all don't stay in the world forever, right? So like, what's the ways to reduce some of that taxes?
Yeah, the most important thing that a lot of us don't do is set up a trust. And no, do you have to have a trust when you're 25? No. But as you're planning for legacy, it is so important. And primarily because if you don't, it's like leaving instructions of what you want to happen to the money, right? And without it, it has to go through the state probate process, which, you see Prince, I think he's still in the process, right? And you don't want to be like that. So step one is talk to an estate planning attorney, or there's some programs where you can do some of the simple docs yourself, right? On LegalZoom, et cetera. And make sure your instructions are there. That's number one. Secondly, there's still a estate tax exemption that's, relatively high. It was as recently as last year, like 13 million or so. And that means you can pass that amount as long as you leave the instructions to your family or whomever in a tax efficient way. Another place to talk to your tax attorney. But, sometimes it's not even liquid. You can, leave a family business or a family farm. A lot of us have farms down south, et cetera, that are in the family, and it gets real complicated because there were no instructions left, and now there's 40 cousins trying to figure out what to do with this land, right? So taking the time, planning in general, whether it's QSBS, estate planning, financial planning, planning for your retirement, is so important. And all that, it sounds overwhelming, and you definitely do need a professional to help you with that. And that's really what ultimately wealth management is all about. I would say it's financial planning is equally as important as asset allocation and investing. And it's about being thoughtful and having a plan. Because what's the old saying? Without a plan, any road will take you there. So it's nice to have a map, and it can change over time, but without a plan, it's really hard to get there.
Fair to plan is planning to fail. Or sorry, fair to plan is planning to fail. I did say it right. I guess doesn't make sense to me, but that's what people do, right?
You also said, which is the key mistake, don't buy high and sell low. That's the key investing mistake. And you said that right as well.
And people will still do it. They'll still do it. There's nothing you can do about that. So I guess, in talking to entrepreneurs, is there something that you always will give them advice like, hey, as an entrepreneur, this is what you look out for, or this is what I really advise you for financial literacy, just in general?
Yeah, in general, there's so much information out there that you can read about, and you can educate yourself on, and you can watch, all kinds of videos, and there's just a lot of books. There's just a lot of content. So, really read and watch and learn. That's number one. The second thing is, what folks like to say in the venture capital world is, find product market fit, right? Find a proof of concepts, a product, and make sure it really addresses a problem or need of a consumer segment. And I think that's easier to do than it ever was. And I think it has become accelerated because of Zoom, and everybody's sitting in their homes, and people are much more open to engaging in product, and technology is so much cheaper When the internet first came out, when I was in my entrepreneurial phases before, it was really expensive to get a site built or an app built or an experience built. It's really easy. A lot of that stuff you can kind of pick and play from various providers and create a mock-up of the experience and get proof of concept that somebody wants your product and that you're actually solving a problem. That's the most important thing. And then you can kind of go on your journey from there. But just get it out there. That's, in the first phase of the internet, all you needed was a good story. But now to attract investors, people want proof of concept. So that's my main advice.
Great. I think on the we've kind of tossed this around, but we've used the word net worth, right?
Yes.
How does one compute their net worth?
Yeah, it's very simple in concept, sometimes harder to do. And it's simply assets minus liabilities. So your assets, for example, might be the value of your home, which you can check every day if you want on Zillow. Any, other assets that you have, investments, your 401k, et cetera. And then liabilities is any debt that you have against those assets. So your mortgage, maybe you took out a 401k loan, for example. And then you net those, and that's your net worth.
Right. And then on the sense of, when we think about, throughout our lives, right, there's all these different experiences that, we're just like, man, like, I still remember that, right? And I'm hoping people are listening to this, like, you're going to be that, I still remember when Yvette said this. So when you think about the best financial advice that someone has given you about wealth building, or really being fiscally responsible, what was that?
Like I said, I don't think I'm the poster child for fiscally responsible. So I'm more of an investor. And the first wealth manager I joined outside of Wall Street was Charles Schwab. And had a really powerful message back then. It was really about helping investors help themselves. And what he used to always say is, and that's why I lead with this, hey, just go 100% stocks in your 20s, right? And he said, bonds cannot and do not grow. And that's very simple, but it's just true, right? When you're young, and here's another sense of borrowing, sometimes you can use leverage margin to buy more stocks. Now you don't want to keep that margin balance out forever, and you don't want to be in danger of getting a margin call, meaning it's so close to the value of your stocks and then they drop, and then the bank's calling you saying, hey, you got to send some cash in before 5 o'clock. You don't want to be in that position. But if you use margin in a thoughtful way to get a little bit more stock when you're young, both of those tips came from Charles Schwab. And I always thought about those. You got to be thoughtful about that. But it's true, no matter what, bonds are great, especially as you're, getting older, because then it adds some stability to your portfolio. But when you're young, they're just, whatever the stated interest rate is, you're not getting any more than that stated interest rate.
No lie. All right, so in line also now with we talked about wealth. We started off by talking about building wealth amongst the Black community. So with your experience, with your role, like, what are some good things that you see that are happening to kind of increase the financial knowledge within our communities? And then moving and looking forward, what are some things that you think we need to do more of?
One thing, just because I'm at a bank that serves the innovation economy, I will tell you there is just an explosion of new diverse managers for new funds, which is great. And we've just talked about it. It's human nature to invest in what you know and invest in who you know. So if we want more capital going to diverse companies, we've got to have more capital managed by diverse managers. And I will say, since George Floyd, that has been It was already building, but it's just exponentially growing. So I'm excited about that. That's very much the front end of the process. We still got to get that capital deployed, and then you've got to have those companies grow. But I am just really excited to see that happen. It's the first time in my whole career that there's been this much momentum around new funds, new diverse funds.
Did you see anything that, I mean, that's great that it's happening, but anything that you see like we need to do more of this, or I see this on the horizon as well?
Well, I guess if you say what's my concern, is it's really great. There's all this enthusiasm, and you always worry, are we going to, just when the door of access is open for us, is that where the bubble is? And is that where there's too much capital for too few deals? So then the deals get overpriced and they can't make enough growth and capital to make that investment worth it. And then it ends up kind of petering out, or is it just the beginning of a new, sector and decade of growth, and it'll allow that, glass ceiling, that closed door to be sprung open, and we'll actually achieve the goal of closing the wealth gap. And from right now, there's no way of knowing which one it is. So that's probably my biggest concern.
Yeah, kind of like a wait and see approach, but definitely a real concern. So thank you very much on like just the knowledge. I feel like that was like, we went from like financial planning 101 to, the, 202, whatever these college levels courses are. The one thing that I think we have to talk about as well is your leadership, right? So great job in what you're doing with just your career, and currently as a C-suite within SVB. That's great. So continue to push that. For you as a leader, right? What are some of the important elements, aspects, characteristics that you feel leaders should have?
Well, personally, I think, there's two ways to lead. There's the command and control model, and then there's the inspiring innovation model. I've always been drawn to the latter. That's how I like to work. So therefore, I like to create an environment where that's how everybody is working. And no matter what role you have in an organization, there's always an opportunity to innovate and rethink. And the thing I've learned, I think early in your career, you get good at something, and then you start managing that thing, and you still kind of go back to doing it yourself. And that takes a long time to break. Always just saying, well, instead of me inspiring others to figure this out and do it their way, I'm just going to do it myself. And what I've learned in these last, I would say, 10 years or so, that if you let go of that, you create the vision, you hire the team with a whole diverse set of skill sets, so that you don't have any blind spots. You're just one person. And you let go of this notion that you always know the best way to get to the vision, or that the vision has to be static, that it can't change and evolve. If you let go of all of that, that's when you really actually perform, is by unleashing the talent of the crowd at every level. And actually, it's just great fun to see it come to fruition when you create that kind of environment.
Poetry. so, so when it also comes to like you as a, C-suite, you're a leader, and, in a position where there's probably very few people that, look like you, right? So in particular, when we think about Black women in these leadership roles, and recently, Roz Brewer, CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So congratulations on that, Roz.
Exciting.
Very exciting. So I guess with you within the workforce, you talked a little bit about this around like diversity being, you've seen a lot more diversity, right? But still big gap. How have you been able to, I don't want to say manage, but like with the representation, I know you do a lot with talking to other women, and you're really keen on increasing diversity, but like, what are some of the things that you're doing as a leader to kind of increase those numbers?
I love the Michelle Obama quote. I'll paraphrase, and that is, if you finally get a seat at the table and you're not going to use that seat to ensure that there's more coming up behind you, then you might as well get out of the way. So I think about that almost every day. Like, what are you doing to make it more accessible for more people? Um, and then I think the other piece is, I say about 10 years ago, I recognized that, you know what? Let's just be clear. They know I'm a Black woman. It's not a secret, right? I think you spend a lot of your early career trying to make everyone else comfortable, and therefore you might hold back a bit of yourself. And that's not good for you, obviously, but it's also not bringing your whole self to work. And once I just said, you know what? I think they know. It really kind of liberated me to be me and to really step into the fullness of my capabilities and my voice. So that has been, like I said, these last 10 years especially have been just really, really great.
Your best self is your true self, right? The genuine you. Um, what keeps you motivated?
What keeps me motivated? I don't know if all of you have availed yourself of Strength Finders. You can find it as on Amazon. It's a book. It's a philosophy. The general philosophy is, we all have strengths, and most of us spend our lives self-flagellating and beating ourselves up on our weaknesses. And if you actually had an extra hour to either make your dominant hand writing a little better or take your weak hand and try to make it better, you're going to make a lot more progress leaning on your dominant hand. So embrace your strengths, embrace who you are, and spend time making those things stronger. And here's the secret: when you are an expert in something and when your strengths are really kind of outstanding, people assume you're good at a whole bunch of other things that you might not even be. So, so it's just, back to this whole notion of thinking of life as an investment. Invest in your strengths and double down on those. And that'll get you much further than worrying about the things that you're not as strong at. And then finally, when you're building your team, make sure you surround yourself with people that have the strengths that you need but don't have. So don't try to build them in yourself. That's just not who you are. But make sure you surround yourself with the right folks to make that happen.
And as you think about like your team, there's being goal driven, being able to inspire them, and then it's really connected as well when we think about like wealth building because we set up these goals. One of the things that we're really keen on is helping people to be accountable with their goals. So for you, like what are some of the things that you do to raise that accountability for yourself to accomplish your goals?
Yeah, everybody's different, and that is, I'm just wired that way. Super goal oriented. I told you, pinch ambitious, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. And so, I find if I just think of it and write it down and very list oriented, that's motivation enough. I just love ticking those things off. The other thing too is I love seeing, very early in my career, before I went into banking, I was a consultant at McKinsey. I love the big idea, but I figured out it always twists and turns when you implement it, always. And you've got to inspire people to a common vision, and that's messy, but I enjoy getting it out to the customer, even if it's changed more than just the idea itself. And so figure out what kind of person you are. Are you a person that just loves ideas and communicating the idea motivates you? Then great. If you are someone who likes to build, then make sure you're in a role where you're building. But if you are not feeling motivated, you're not in the right spot.
Simple, simple.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to take you through a quick lightning round. First thing that comes to your head, go ahead and spit it out. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Texting or talking?
Texting.
Favorite day of the week?
Friday.
Ask for permission or beg for forgiveness?
Beg for forgiveness.
All right. So
Those are easy.
East Coast or West Coast?
Oh, now here, I'm going to cheat here. I'm a both. I live on the West Coast now, but I've been back and forth. I literally probably 7 times. So
if you had to choose one for the team, what would it be?
Oh man, oh, you're killing me. Well, I love the one you're with. I'm on the West Coast. Let's say West.
Smart answer. All right, no, this has been great. So Yvette, leave us with some final words of encouragement for our listeners, whether it's financially, leadership, whatever it may be. But leave us with some final words of encouragement.
If you're not a little uncomfortable, you're not trying hard enough. So keep pushing.
Remember that, everyone. That was the easy one. So Yvette, thank you very much, right, from really teaching us and letting us know that the fundamentals about investing, about wealth building, all the way to, getting out the hole and knowing exactly what to do. And then I think it's wonderful as well because, you're a very humble person, but I think people should also recognize that this is an excellent leader. She's doing great things and she's really supporting it with her actions as well. So for everyone that's listening, listen again. You know how to invest. You know what to do. When you know better, you have to do better. So that's what you have to do. And Yvette, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. And thanks for having me.
Dream big and never stop dreaming. But remember, dreams without action are just dreams and often lead to disappointment. So let's get to work. And thank you for listening to my Dream Big Club show. Please leave a review and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whichever podcast app you have. I'm your host, Sean Phillips. Take care.